You're going to be young, fit, and beautiful for the rest of your life and never, ever die. Ha! As ridiculous as that sounds, so many of us spend so much time obsessed with youth and slowing down aging. The reality is we all get old, and as we age, our health goals must change. This involves shedding outdated habits and outdated routines as we learn to exercise smarter, not harder. In this episode of The Space Makers, Matt and I will explore the science of aging and how our health and fitness goals need to change as we move into the midlife reset in order to make space for life's inevitable changes. We'll discuss how health and fitness in our 20s and 30s must shift in our 40s, 50s and 60s and what it looks like to navigate life's inevitable health resets. So let's make space to be strong and healthy throughout life's many resets, not trying to be young forever, but evolving the way we approach health and fitness as we get older. Let's dive in. Hey, welcome back everyone to The Space Makers, a podcast to help you think clearly about how to make space in your life for what truly matters. And I'm here with my good friend and fellow space maker who drives cars through fences, Matt Bain. Welcome.
Thanks, Dan.
So today we're going to talk about health and fitness and how our fitness and health goals change throughout the stages of life. And this is part of a broader framework or a broader episode theme, which is making space for life's inevitable resets. Today's episode, we are talking about health and fitness and how our health and fitness goals need to change as we grow older. And it's part of a broader theme called Making Space for Life's Inevitable Resets. And we're talking about the big idea that the types of habits and practices that set us up for success in our 20s and 30s need to be rediscovered, reimagined, and sometimes unlearnt in order to have a successful reset in our midlife squeeze. And that is definitely true for health and fitness. So I was at the gym just the other day.
Oh, nice.
And thanks, Matt, very kind of you. And I was doing some bicep curls or something like that.
We call them vanity curls, for sure.
Vanity curls. I was doing vanity curls, and next to me was this clearly older guy. My guess is he was in his 80s, and he was there lifting like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 kilo weights. And I was like, you're doing really well. And he said to me, look, I used to be able to do what you could do. I'm like, that's nice. And I said, how long have you been at the gym? And I actually meant this gym. But he said, I've been going to gyms for 70 years.
Whoa.
And I'm like, how old are you? And he said, I'm 92 years old, nearly 93. And I'm like, oh my gosh, good on you, mate.
Yeah,
like,
that is impressive.
I hope that if I make it to 92, I will be there at the gym, exercising regularly. It made me wonder, what was going on in this guy's 40s and 50s in his midlife squeeze in terms of his beliefs and his goals and the way he approached fitness and exercise to actually allow him to be standing before me, lifting relatively heavy weights, certainly for that age, at 92.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth considering. The other thing I was thinking about as we kind of enter into this subject is how my mum is. So she's always been interested in fitness and exercise. And so she's 70 now. And we recently went to Adelaide and we went on the high ropes course with my kids. And it's fantastic. You hook yourself up and you do lots of zip lining and kind of balancing on different things. And you're about, 10 meters above the ground. So it's fairly high.
Yeah, it's decent.
So that's a lot of fun. But my mum came along and she just went straight up. She didn't do the hardest ones, obviously, but she zip lined and she did some of the basic courses.
Yeah, at 70.
Yeah, absolutely. It was cool to see her with the grandkids, kind of zip lining and taking photos and enjoying herself. Yeah. And again, it made me think, what does it look like to set yourself up to be zip lining when you're 70 and to be participating and being part of your grandkids' lives?
Yeah.
Because of how you actually approach health and fitness. Maybe in your 20s and 30s, but also in the midlife squeeze.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the difference between the 20s and 30s, 40s and 50s in terms of exercise and health goals. I get to put on my physiotherapy hat, which I'm excited about because I hardly ever talk about health and fitness, but I did do more than a decade as a physiotherapist. Yeah. And so I certainly, in this area, feel like I'm drawing on experience and knowledge from many different fields. I worked in musculoskeletal rehab. I've worked with amputees. I've worked with psychological physiotherapy health. I've done geriatric health. So I get to draw on a few different ideas and we'll bring in our own personal stories and maybe some of our own philosophies into this episode, and hopefully give people practical tools to make space for a healthy midlife reset. So here's the thing, Matt. We all get older. The one kind of guarantee in life is that our bodies will decline over time and will slow down mentally, physically, and at some point we kick the dust. Now,
And we're starting this one off with the good news.
we just thought we'd start off the episode with some positive news.
Yeah, that's a half full perspective we love so much.
That's right. But seriously, we are in a culture which kind of idolizes being young. Obviously all the Instagram images are of young people, and there's this kind of obsession in our culture about staying young. We don't have a culture where, let's say, elders are really respected, like a lot of ancient cultures, or actually a lot of cultures that just aren't Western cultures, where, older people come with respect and that sense of wisdom, and where you look up to kind of people as they're older.
Yeah.
And so therefore there's this kind of current, as you mentioned last week, to wanting to be young and youthful. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. But the reality is, as you and I know, as you get old, you hit your 40s and 50s, certainly 60s, 70s, things decline. In fact, from the research perspective, this is just one small area. If you think about muscle mass, it's statistically true that our muscle mass decreases at about 3 to 8% per decade after the age of 30.
Oh, man. So
I know.
like you're already telling me that I've lost some of my mad gains?
Yeah, absolutely. You're losing your mad gains very quickly.
Wow.
So, sarcopenia, the loss of muscle, is inevitable, but you can obviously change that with exercise and weight training. But that's just one area that demonstrates that there is a long, slow grind to losing muscle, to losing agility, and a whole lot of other areas of physical health as we get older. And so the reality is we have to start to think differently about what it looks like to be healthy. The reality is some of the things that keep us healthy when we're young are the same as when we're older. We need to eat well, we need to sleep right, we need to do kind of weight-resisted training or build our cardiovascular system up. So exercise, fitness, good diet, sleep is good at any age. But it gets tougher, as you know, as we get older.
Yeah.
It gets harder to maintain what we have. And even as we try to maintain it, eventually we will lose our health and our strength. And it can be hard to change the way we approach health and the way we approach our own perception of our bodies and our own perception of our abilities throughout that midlife reset and beyond.
It's hard not to view that acceptance as being tied up with me having to face my own mortality.
And so we're going to talk about some of that, those cheery subjects. And the good news is you can actually make some adjustments which will make a tremendous difference into how you approach health and fitness as you get older. But before we get into more happy ideas about death and dying and mortality, let's go back to our practical exercise, because at the end of each podcast, we encourage people to do something with this information. We've called this a pod course more than a podcast because we want it to be more than just you and I riffing about ideas. We want it to lead to some types of changes in behavior. And ideally, we would love people to finish this 10-part series of season 2 and actually walk away saying, in the area of health and friendship or productivity and money, I've actually implemented something that has helped me to either navigate my 20s and 30s better or, 40s and 50s or even beyond, to actually make a difference in your life to help you make space. So what did we ask people to do, Matt?
Yeah, so Dan, we asked people to complete a little exercise that, to give again credit where it's due, came from the Good Life book. And it was called the Friendship Map. So made up of 4 quadrants. And the 2 axes were quality of friendship. Yep. So that was, again, does this friendship energize me? Does it inspire me? Does it encourage me? Or does it deplete me?
Yep.
And the second axis was that of frequency. So how often or how infrequently do I see this particular person?
And it's based on the longitudinal research that people live longer, they're happier, and they're healthier based on the quality and frequency of their relationships. So therefore, it's worth mapping out our current state in order to work out what might our future state look like.
Yes.
So we can set ourselves up to invest in friendships when that's an area where most people tend to neglect input
Yes.
at the expense of other
Yeah.
things that are less meaningful.
Yeah, that's right. So I was meant to really give you clarity in the here and now as to what the state of your friendships look like. So it's going to then help your intentionality in terms of how you may want to modify or change any of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, I found it really helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
you and I have both talked about this since we did the exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I found it helpful to have a framework and a model to be able to say, okay, these are the friends or the people in my life who I see at the moment. This is how frequently I see them. This is how infrequently I see them. And more importantly, where would I like those relationships to be? Again, I find the statistic quite confronting that people who have the strongest relationships in their 50s are the ones who are statistically happier and healthier and live longer in their 80s. It's a very clear research-based study. And so therefore, since I'm only a few years away from 50, I've got a few years to improve my friendship map. Now, I'm sure it doesn't quite work as in on my 50th birthday, that's my cutoff date.
Yeah.
But hey, I'm going to take this seriously. And it was useful. So I identified there are a few friends in particular
Yeah.
who I just don't see enough. It's not like they're totally neglected, but look, I work hard. I run my own business.
Yeah.
I have a family. There is so much just in life. I find it hard enough just to keep on top of my inbox and my to-do list, let alone invest in friends who are happy for me not to invest in them because they're super busy. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just a reality.
It's just a classic comparison. I find it so hard just to stay on top of this really important stuff like my inbox and to-do lists, let alone for this not so important stuff like friends.
Exactly. But that's how it often works, right? Because, hanging out with friends doesn't pay my bills.
Yeah.
And hanging out with friends doesn't give me kudos. But actually my job does. And work is important, but it can't be at the expense.
Yeah, but
of
you're
friendship.
running your own business too, I guess, which is the other, you probably already mentioned that. But I think that is like a real distinct factor, as in you just can't take a day off and someone else is going to cover you.
Yeah, exactly. There's enormous joys in running your own business and great freedom and flexibility and high pressures. But none of that's an excuse in the sense of I don't want to look back and be one of those people that said I used to have friends.
Yeah.
And so again, it was helpful because since then I've caught up with a coffee with one person.
Yeah.
I'm really seriously working at how can I have a monthly connection with a few people. So we've already locked in, like on a Sunday afternoon, I'm gonna have a outdoor fire. I've got a fire pit.
Oh, cool.
And maybe catch up with one of my friends at least on a more regular basis.
Yep.
Once a month, and then on a Friday, and we start tonight. I'm going to catch up with another couple when our kids head off to youth group. So again, it's just trying to create a pattern and a rhythm where I'm more intentional. I do like your idea of actually having a regular weekly catch-up or monthly catch-up, I think, with a bunch of guys.
We actually start this weekend.
Good. I'm glad I was invited. Thanks, Matt.
I feel like we get a fair bit of one-on-one time.
Doesn't count when thousands of people are listening. You put into practice. It is a monthly catch-up?
A monthly catch-up, like a monthly catch-up with the same crew of old friends.
Yep.
And everyone who's part of that knows each other as well, which is really cool. So they've all got history. But again, life has gotten busy. We've, I think it'd be fair to say, all got caught up in that current. There's very little regular occasions where all those people would kind of just as a side effect be brought together.
Yeah, great.
So I had to make it intentional. But again, they all know each other, which is really cool.
So I can see, that friendship quadrant for you. All your friends are moving to the right because you see them more frequently, and I'm being left behind. Thanks very much.
The hours we put in here, the hours.
All right, so Matt, let's get philosophical before we get practical. You and I read an article, and it made us think.
This little doozy came from 2014 from The Atlantic magazine, and it was penned by a guy called Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel. So he's an oncologist, he's a bioethicist, and I think at the time I worked out roughly, he must have been mid to late 50s. And he was also, just in terms of, I guess, his chops and credentials, he was part of President Biden's panel of experts on COVID as well. So
So
he's a serious,
guy.
He's a serious guy. The article was entitled, "Why I Hope to Die at 75." Why I hope to die at 75. And to be clear, this guy, he, again, on record for a long time as not being supportive of physician-assisted suicidal death.
Yeah, voluntary assistance.
Yeah.
So he's not saying we should be
being,
topping ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. And he's not planning on taking that route when he turns. So again, he hopes to die at 75. And his reasons are thus. He's got this idea, right, that by 75, most of us, if we've had a halfway decent chance at life, would have lived a full life, well, like what he calls a full life by the age of 75. Children, hopefully, grandchildren, accomplished in our careers, So in terms of like what constitutes a good life, by 75, you've had a fairly good shot at achieving that. After 75, statistically, and he said Americans particularly don't like talking about it or acknowledging it, and there's a whole industry that's been built up on this idea of, I think he calls it like American immortality, that if I take the right supplements, have like, if I stick to the Mediterranean diet consistently enough, if I know the right doctors who can throw me the right, pharmaceuticals, if I do enough Sudoku, then I can live for 85, 95. And he said, like his big point is that, of course, in terms of lifespan, that is getting, for most countries, more and more and more kind of pushed out. But his point is that although in terms of lifespan, so time that you live, like chronological age, that may be getting bumped out. In terms of health span, so actually not being rendered compromised by diseases or conditions, that isn't decreasing. So effectively, you can live longer in somewhere like America, but that just means that, in some ways, your inevitable death is taking more time.
So you're not experiencing necessarily health span, which is a quality of
That's
life,
right. Yeah,
but you're just extending your
that's right.
life further.
Exactly.
And it almost pushes into the idea of why are we trying to live as long as we can anyway? Like what are the cultural factors or the value and belief factors that are, making us obsessed with not being old? Or living longer. From my memory, he was even saying that once he hits 75, he'll stop having tests, he'll stop taking medications. And
even antibiotics.
Look, I'm not sure whether I agree with his philosophy or not, but it did stimulate conversation, certainly between you and I, particularly around this idea that, like, how do we approach health as we get older? What is the goal of health? Is it long life or is it health span? And what might it look like to, I suppose, set yourself up in that second transition of life, which we're talking about, the midlife squeeze, in order to then have a good second mountain experience and maybe even let go of some of the need to be forever young.
Well, to go back to his experience, I know at the time of the article, again, like mid-50s, he had just climbed Kilimanjaro with his 2 sons. And he talked about being a grandparent. He said having this kind of set point in your mind of 75 makes you kind of confront. So he actually had a calendar date, I think it was 2032.
Okay.
So 2032, he was expecting and hoping to die. So immediately that means that there's a concrete finish line to this mortal coil. And so he said that was useful in the sense that it made him think about the meaning of life more. So in terms of like what health means for him, I think you can, infer being active enough to do stuff with your adult sons, being active and fit enough to be like an able-bodied grandparent and contemplate what the purpose of your life is.
That reminds me a bit of productivity author Oliver Burkeman, who wrote a book, 4,000 Weeks, which is excellent. And essentially said that the average person lives about 4,000 weeks. And so therefore, how do we actually make use of that time as best as possible? But, I know a number of people who have taken that quite seriously, and they've got like an app, a 4,000-week app, and it actually shows them how many days they might have left. Now, of course, they can't guarantee they'll get 4,000 weeks. For them, it's a reminder that we need to think carefully about how we use our time because there is an endpoint. And so we need to kind of somehow wrestle with the zooming in and zooming out, which we talked about in episode 1. That on the one hand, we have to acknowledge the reality of our circumstance and how busy we are for both health, friendships, relationships, money, whatever area we're talking about. But at the same time, be willing to look forward and zoom back to realize actually there's no oasis of time where I'm sitting around doing nothing, because if you don't invest in your health now or your relationships or any other area that we're talking about, you may not get that chance later on. Now, when you and I were talking about health as one of the topics around the idea that life changes and our habits must change as we hit the midlife slump, we were wrestling with, do we tackle health in a holistic sense, obviously covering exercise, nutrition, sleep, mental health, there's a whole lot of areas that encompass health. But given my background as a physio and the fact that we need to time box it somehow, we're going to focus predominantly on physical exercise, but that doesn't mean we negate or neglect the importance of these other areas of health, which are equally as important. I think what's fascinating is our goals and our approach to fitness often changes as we get older. In fact, I heard a great podcast episode with Arthur Brooks, who wrote Strength to Strength. We're a fan of that book. And he was talking with Tim Ferriss. And he just had a quick kind of throwaway line, and it really stood out to me. And it was like, oh, that's my philosophy. And it actually clarifies my philosophy of exercise in middle age. And he basically said the goal of exercise in your 50s is to be active in your 80s. which is very similar to that idea of, how do I become like this 90-year-old who's still at the gym, who clearly has enough physical activity to at least be active and do things in his life. And I actually really like that idea, that the goal of exercise now is different than, let's say, when I was 20, where I wanted to win stuff, I wanted to compete, I wanted to have big stretch goals and maybe stretch myself as much as I could. Well, now actually, I want to be exercising in a pattern and in a way that is regular enough and healthy enough that it will set me up for health span rather than lifespan. I'm not interested in living as long as I can, but at least I would like to be active for the life that I have, so I can invest in my grandkids.
And that's good, I think. And that's probably, I think that's where I'm headed towards myself, like personally. Or you can be like Kevin Spacey's character again in American Beauty. He talks to his like neighbors because he sees them exercising and says, I want to start exercising, because he's like in the classic midlife, squeeze. And they say, well, like, what do you want to exercise for? And he goes, I want to look good naked.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really my main goal.
I knew it once it got to the heart of it. Yeah. All the stuff about being there for your grandkids and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, right. Sounds good, doesn't it? It's all about what I look like.
But that's interesting, right? As in, again, so I think, again, like there's being in midlife and, again, trying to be realistic and know that your body, in all these really important ways, is declining. And so wanting to try to mitigate that or slow that decline down as much as possible. And also be useful and functional and healthy for when, for your future self and the people that you love and care about. But I think if we're being honest, for a lot of us, there's still that element of vanity.
So we're going to talk about some principles for how you might approach health and fitness differently in your midlife slump. But look, we want to acknowledge at first that, gosh, health is such a personal thing, and it can be a painful thing for so many people. And there's such a big spectrum of even the people we know in our lives. I mean, on the one hand, we've got people who, to whom health is a real battle. And it could be because of lifestyle choices, the accumulation of kind of years of not exercising. And so they're wrestling with obesity or chronic pain or persistent pain or injuries. Sometimes there's just bad genetics.
Well, that's me, like high cholesterol and heart disease in the family, regardless of what I could do about it.
You just roll the dice and you didn't get a choice. Others, it's just bad luck. I know someone who just had a head injury. It was a completely random, accidental kind of part of life. And it has impacted them significantly and will continue to. So, again, there's no judgment here, and there's no one right way to approach health and fitness.
Yeah.
So,
these aren't prescriptions, are they?
Not prescriptions. The other spectrum, though. So if health is a battle for you, then I still think the principles we're going to share are super helpful, but the specific examples might need to shift based on your capability right now.
Yes.
But then there's the other spectrum where, I don't know, health is a haven where people have invested heavily in their health, where they've always been fit and strong, but potentially are a bit obsessed with youth. And then they hit their midlife slump and they just work harder and faster and spend more money to try to look young.
Yeah.
You've seen that as well, right?
Yeah. Not personally, of course, but
I see those roids.
I've read about it. So where people will double down.
Yeah.
So it's either I'm just going to turn up and double down on the kind of routine that I've always used and that's always brought me success. And or again, particularly if you've got the connections and the money, then there are all these pharmaceutical options available to you that are, again, they're going to enhance things. It's probably not so much about functionality, and it's not about being healthy, preparing to be more healthy for later on in life. It's more about performing and looking good right here, right now.
And avoiding the realities that you're actually just getting old and have to do things differently.
Yes. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with that in mind, let's look at 3 principles that we think have been helpful for us philosophically and practically to help us maybe reset how we approach health later in life. First principle, and again, I know this is value laden, but I just think that it's super important to prioritize your health. And I really think about, Confucius wrote a quote, "A healthy man wants 1,000 things, a sick man only wants one." Basically the idea that when you're healthy, you dream about lots of stuff. Everything's important, but if you're truly sick, then you really just have one thing you think about. And I've seen that. I've seen that as a health professional.
Yes.
I've seen that as my parents have gotten older. That there is a reality that when you have terrible back pain and an incident of it, all you're thinking about is your back, right? You're not thinking about everything else. And so because that's true, we want to zoom out a little bit and think, actually, if that's true, how do we make sure we don't just wait until we're in a health crisis to actually prioritize our health.
Yeah.
Go to the dentist and get your checkups. Go to the doctor when you need to. Don't be so stoic that you wait until you're literally falling apart, that you actually kind of get a health check. That might involve obviously investing in exercise and regular routines, cleaning your teeth, flossing. I mean, there's no perfect routine,
No.
but it is about recognizing that health needs to be up there. And the reality is when you hit your midlife slump, you can't get away with what you used to. So you can get away with stuff when you're 20 and it doesn't matter. You can drink a lot and stay up late and you turn up fine the next day. It doesn't work when you're 50.
So I hear you talking about the virtues of effectively a preventative approach. Be the person who goes to the dentist every 3 months if that's part of your health cover. And so as opposed to only going to the dentist when your mouth hurts like hell.
I trained a bunch of people. It was a few months ago, and we were just talking about general goals in life. We weren't talking about health. And one lady said, look, I know I need to care for myself more. I haven't been to the dentist for like 2 years, and I know I need to. I don't do my GP checkups. I haven't had my optometry checks. And she said, I simply don't have time. Now, she worked in a very flexible work environment, and I was like, why don't you do it at lunchtime? Or why don't you just take some time off? Her boss would have allowed her to do it. Her workplace conditions allowed her to do it. There was something intrinsic in her mindset that wouldn't allow her to care for herself, and she felt guilty if she did. So when we talked about it practically, well, she actually did put some things into place to at least get a checkup. But I think that was a mindset shift that was needed. That I put myself first. I put on the oxygen mask first.
But it's hard, I think, when you're say like early midlife, so like say like still in your 40s, because the self-deceptive part is that if you've taken reasonable care of yourself and or you're lucky, then you can still push yourself to the same kind of extremes as you could when you were younger. So you're still capable, but where it catches up to you is the recovery. So I used to pull all-nighters all the time when I was studying. And then I tried to pull like an all-nighter, I don't know, like maybe last year. And I managed to do it, right? So I literally stayed up all night and worked. But seriously, I then suffered like I'd never suffered before for the following days. And you see that people can still lift as much as they used to perhaps at our age, or they can run, they can still do marathons or ultras or halves. But then the recovery is where it starts to hit you square in the face. You're not the same beast as you were when you were younger. It's just so easy to talk about prioritizing your health, like you said. But again, I think it's like when you get down to the actual hard and fast metrics of building it into your calendar or paying for it, that's like when obviously it becomes a whole lot more difficult.
And even when you gave that example of being young, right? If you're young and you recover fine and you don't experience any pain or any stiffness, well, then why would you prioritize your health? Unless it's a values-based thing. It's a bit like we all know climate change is coming, but unless there's a cyclone, no one takes it seriously. We all stopped everything quickly when COVID came, but a pandemic's been brewing forever. So it's the same type of idea. It's very hard as humans to think about the future and allow it to change your own actions right now. So maybe that's the good news when you hit midlife. The gap between the future and the present becomes closer. And you feel something different. And therefore you get that maybe crisis, which is a good thing, that might say it's time to actually do something different. Invest in my health, make it a priority.
So maybe it'll provide motivation to have to usually inevitably spend more time or money on your health.
So now you and I have both talked about this, recognizing that we are coming from a privileged perspective, and that it does require a certain level of education and wealth in some senses to be able to truly prioritize your health.
It's probably 10 years ago now. I signed up for this charity event that was called something like Live on $2 a day. So as to help you kind of like be able to empathize more and relate more and raise money for people who are literally living below the poverty line, which at that time was $2 or less Australian. I went for 7 days each time on $2 a day. So
you couldn't get dentist checkups, right?
I couldn't. That was okay. You know what really sucked? It turns out you can't afford coffee. You can't afford coffee on $2 a day. You can afford tea,
and you can afford sugar.
Yeah,
you can't afford fresh vegetables.
Exactly. So I was getting by. It was easy to eat, but it was easy to eat poorly. I couldn't afford to eat well. And I thought, man, that really rammed it home. If you want to shop for good quality food, healthy food, it actually costs more.
So we want to acknowledge that, but also probably links in with the money episode, which we'll talk about later. That actually how you set yourself up when you're younger might also open up your options when you're older. So look, the first principle is to prioritize your health. The second principle is to really shift from outcomes to process. And that really came home to me personally when I read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. It's a super popular book. and there's lots of helpful stuff in it. But I was really trying to get into a gym habit because I have a fast metabolism. I find it hard to maintain muscle mass, and I lose weight really quickly, especially if I'm sick, which might sound great. Hey, I don't put on weight,
You poor guy.
and there's benefits to that, but actually it's not so good from your health perspective if you just can't keep on weight. I have to actually go to the gym. It's one of the things I've found that really helps me feel fit and strong, but I just couldn't maintain a decent routine. And I was trying to lift particular amounts of weights. I was trying to have goals and achieve particular goals. I would get to one particular point and then I'd either lose motivation or I'd injure myself or I'd get sick. Do you know what I mean? And so I kept feeling disappointed that I wouldn't reach any outcomes. And that stopped me actually succeeding in going to the gym regularly. And then basically James Clear gave an example where he says, never miss a workout. The win is not whether you can lift X amount of kilos. The win is that you turned up 4 or 5 times a week and that you tick it off using a habit tracker week after week after week. And even if you turn up and don't do any more than just walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes or something that you find fairly simple, you've still ticked off that you went to the gym. Does that make sense? And so I changed my mindset from outcome to process, and it's been an absolute game changer. I've been to the gym 4 to 5 times a week for 3+ years, ever since I read that book. While I've got a set bunch of exercises that I try to do, I say to myself, all I have to do is do the warm-up. But in reality, after I've exercised for 10 minutes, then I typically want to do the rower, and then I typically want to start to do my weights routine, and then I typically actually want to stay longer than I can because I'm into it.
Motivation follows action.
Motivation follows action. Yeah, and there have been 2 or 3 occasions where I really, really didn't feel like it. I walked on the treadmill and I thought, I'll stop this. I'm going home. I'm going to get a coffee. But I didn't miss the workout.
Yeah.
Have you found that idea helpful for you?
Oh man, I don't want to be that guy who does jiu-jitsu who then ends up talking about jiu-jitsu all the time. But the classic example here, or the parallel, was what I've heard referred to as belt chasing. So, in martial arts, obviously progression is signified by different colored belts.
Yep.
And there's obviously like a hierarchical progression. Yeah, so particularly like when you're younger, you see like younger people will hit the jits gym and they may go to like literally 4 or 5 classes a week. And they're thinking, I just need to advance in belts.
Yeah, okay.
And they're young, so they can do that and it doesn't break them. A person my age tries doing that, then I will get broken because I will not be able to recover.
Yeah, okay.
So I've got to shift my perspective from I'm not chasing belts, but I'm doing it for the process, and the belts are a nice byproduct.
It's a bit like the dieting thing.
Yeah.
Again, if the aim is to lose weight and you go on a hardcore diet, it does work.
Yes, yeah.
But then if you look back in a year or 2 or 5 years, it hasn't worked because you haven't been able to process or a love of the process into your life. Where it's much better to change your mindset, and it actually leads to better results. And it doesn't mean you won't be successful, because remember the episode from Jack Riewoldt? We had an interview with AFL superstar Jack Riewoldt from the Richmond Tigers last season.
Yeah.
And he was saying that when the Richmond Tigers were focused on outcome, so how many wins and losses they had, and when they became obsessed with wins and losses, he said they lost their way. And it happened a few times in his career. But when they went back to process, well, then all the components came together and they won 3 premierships.
Yeah.
So the first principle as we hit the midlife slump is to prioritize health. The second one is to move from outcome to process. The third one, I think, is to actually change your strategy, which essentially means to be willing to adapt how you approach fitness and health with age. I'll give you 2 examples. Again, these aren't prescriptive. They're certainly not prescriptive, but it's how I've worked. So when I was young, I loved swimming and water polo was my sport. I really enjoyed the competition. I enjoyed how physical it was. I enjoyed how hard the sport was. And it was perfect. It was a good stretch when I was 20. As I got older, it's hardcore. I don't have the body strength. I'm not big enough to really push it out in the pool. And I started injuring myself and it just got difficult. I couldn't keep up. But a few years ago, I was like, I still really miss playing water polo. And I even thought about going back, but I'm like, I'm not big enough. I'm not strong enough for that kind of game anymore. And it was about accepting my limitations. And then someone said, well, there's this thing called water basketball. I'm like, what do you mean water basketball? And so I went to the aquatic center and there's this kind of strange niche sport, which is actually a little bit like water polo, but honestly for old people, okay? Old people meaning my age.
Yeah.
And so you're still in a team, but you have flippers, so it's not as hard. It's non-contact. You are still swimming the ball up and down the pool and you're still shooting goals, but they're, basketball hoops instead of kind of water polo nets. It's kind of super fun.
Cool.
And it's social.
Yep. Yes.
Like we won the premiership, like our team won the premiership
Oh,
last week. And
congratulations.
you know, it was like a pat on the back. There's no trophies. I mean, it's totally low key.
Yeah.
And that's the point, you know.
Yeah.
It's just a fun, enjoyable sport that uses a similar type of skills. So I swim, I get to use the ball, I play in a team,
Yeah.
I turn up every week, and it's social, but it works perfectly for 40 to 60-year-olds.
Yeah, it sounds like not unlike kind of touch footy equivalent.
Yeah, like the touch footy equipment. I
Yeah.
think, and so I think that's perfect. I'm not going to get any awards by being a water basketball superstar, but at the same time, it's it ticks a lot of boxes, and it's about that change in mindset
Yes.
of how you can still get the benefits of what you used to do in a different way, recognizing where your body is and the age that you have.
Yeah.
So the other example I found really useful is, again, going to the gym. So my body type is ectomorph, which means it's hard to build muscle. It's hard to actually maintain strength. And so I find that at the gym, I kept basically injuring myself. Nothing serious, but, you know, I'd lift something, I'd tweak my back. I'd lift something, I'd end up with some type of kind of sore thing around my tennis elbow.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's just the way things are, right? But I found it super frustrating because I would keep trying to build up at the gym, and it wasn't the effort that stopped me. It's the fact that I'm getting old, and I would strain something. You know what I mean? And like you talked about recovery is the biggest issue. I'd lift something, and then I'd be seriously sore for 2 days.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, this just isn't fun. So then I heard again from Arthur Brooks. He talked about a type of exercise at the gym called blood flow restricted training. And it sounds a bit full on, but basically you put cuffs on your arms, you put cuffs on your legs, and it literally restricts your blood flow. Now, it might sound a bit full on, but there's heaps of research in this space. There's lots of randomized control studies. There's a systematic review. And basically, it's for people who are either in rehab, so they injure themselves, or for older people who want to exercise until they're 90.
Yeah, right.
What it allows you to do is allows you to exercise and to lift weights, but to lift a lot lighter weights to get the same type of results, which is perfect, in my opinion, from where I'm at.
Easier on the joints.
So I've just found it super helpful
Yeah.
to add that into my routine and then lift a lot less. It's way faster recovery and you get great benefits.
Yeah, wow.
I'm not saying everyone should do it, but that is another example about if you've got the resources and the education, you can change how you exercise. And I think there are lots of those type of examples where if you start being creative and thinking about how you can exercise with the end in mind, which is to be active when you're older, which is at least my goal, there are smart ways to do it.
Yeah.
So do you have any examples about how you've adapted?
Yeah, look, and this is hardly original or unique. Like I'm part of a fairly large club. I haven't been a physio, not an exercise physiologist. I'm like a lot of guys spent way too much time on the internet reading about this and subscribing to forums and buying gym equipment. And again, in my own experience and some of my friends and lots of people who I follow online, it seems to be fairly common that you hit a point in life. Usually it's like, and depending upon how long you've been training this way for, so late 30s, early 40s, definitely mid 40s, where your body just starts to rebel. So I still like to run, but I don't know how much longer I'll be able to keep it up because of my knees. And the classic transition here is that you go from being a runner to I think the acronym is MAMIL. Middle-aged man in lycra. So
Excellent. So back to the
you
cycling.
The cycling.
The cycling. But that makes sense. It honestly makes sense to me that actually there does come a point where it makes sense to move from running to cycling.
Well, as long as it makes sense. That's the main thing, right? It's got nothing to do with...
You don't have to wear the lycra, Matt.
Well, that's good to know. Thanks for the permission not to have to don the lycra. But...
We've just lost half our audience now. So just to finish before we get to the practice, health and fitness and the change through midlife, it's not actually about the exercises. It's actually about the mindset and your identity and your psychology, and you're willing to let go of being 20.
I get that. And I want to accept it. I think for me at least, there's a complementary piece, which is all about, in an age-appropriate way, still having some degree of ambition and drive and desire for achievement. But again, it can't be me looking at the 20-year-old version of myself and comparing myself against that guy, and it can't be me comparing myself to the 20 and 30-year-old guys who I spend a fair bit of time now exercising like amongst and with. But at the same time, so I can't cling to that. but I don't want to drop it entirely and go, well, you know, what do I do? Again, like golf's looking super attractive at the moment.
But this is the midlife squeeze, right?
Yeah.
It's because of the squeeze, and this is the same with money, with health, with happiness, with productivity, that like you've got a lot of health left and you've got a lot of goals you can achieve physically. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
So the squeeze is that you're experiencing a decline in some areas of your life, and at the same time, you've still got a whole lot of life left. You want to achieve a lot more, as opposed to, let's say, the second mountain or even the twilight years, where there's not quite that tension. And so this is the tension of that second reset.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, you can still run a marathon, and actually, if you decide to run marathons, you can still be extremely good at it.
Yes.
You know, until you're 50, 60, even older. But the way you approach it and the cost on your body might actually be different.
Yeah.
And you have to wrestle with whether that's what you want. So, Matt, let's end with a practical exercise. What do you do about it? You know, we like to give a practical activity, something you can take away and practically do if you're younger versus being in the midlife squeeze.
Yeah. Say you're 20 to 40. I think a really good idea, and this is influenced by the work of Cal Newport, is to actually sign up, as in commit yourself to something, some sport, exercise, fitness activity that is goal oriented, and make it pretty audacious. Like, make it something that's definitely going to stretch you, and ideally, like, make it something that's going to commit you to do it alongside other people as well. Yeah. And the reason why we'd be suggesting this is because it's going to help shift your psychology to start to view yourself as someone who takes the habit of exercise and fitness seriously.
Yeah, so it becomes your identity.
Part of your identity. So you're someone, you know, who's already got like a whole lot of friends, because we know that's the most important thing.
Nah, friendships don't matter.
And then, but then behind that, a close second is that you're someone who takes your fitness and your health seriously.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a James Clear idea, though, isn't it? That you act yourself into a new identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that actually, the part of the benefit of swinging big and going for an audacious physical goal and exercising regularly with others isn't just that you're achieving it, but that you're reinforcing an identity that is, I'm someone who exercises, I take fitness seriously, and I'm capable and strong.
So again, like we talked about before, it's and like you'll both enjoy it and benefit from it here and now. But really importantly, it does act as a preventative measure in the sense that it does set up your future self for success.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, as a physiotherapist, having seen lots of different personality types, there are type A personalities who push themselves all or nothing, and it's not in a planned way. So when we say swing big and pick an activity which is tough, I don't mean if you've been on the couch for the last 3 years and have never done anything but online gaming, that you suddenly try a marathon tomorrow. You still need to swing big sensibly, meaning that you come up with a plan, a graded exercise program. You might increase your exercise by 5% per day or per week or whatever your plan is. But the point is, go for something audacious.
Yeah.
So the exercise in the next week clearly is not to run a marathon, but it's to take some time to think about, what might an exercise goal be? How can I swing for something big? Maybe it's to climb a mountain. Maybe it's to run a marathon.
Yeah.
Maybe it's to get into Lycra and look better than a middle-aged person. Whatever your fitness goal is, take time this week to think about it, write it down, and actually do the next step.
Yeah.
That probably isn't to buy a bike or to spend lots of money. It might be simply to go for a walk. Or sign up to something.
Sign up, like, or, a heap of gyms, martial arts classes, etc. offer, like, the free trial.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So do that this week. Sign up for something, even if it's a crazy idea and you don't know if it'll stick.
Yeah.
But do something.
Yeah.
So that's 20s to 40s. Take a swing.
Yes.
What about if you're in your midlife squeeze?
Yeah, so my feeling is that this is like a little bit more kind of complicated, and it's going to be like a bit more nuanced. So if you're someone who's, again, for quite a while you've been sedentary, haven't really done much at all, again, so you kind of you found yourself in a position for a whole lot of reasons where you're just not fit and not feeling that inspired or motivated, then I think, like, to some degree, you start off on the simple end of the spectrum. And you ask yourself and answer the question, what's the right type of exercise for me? And it's going to be the exercise that you're most likely to do.
Yeah.
So don't be too ambitious on this. Don't be too aspirational if you find yourself coming from this position. And don't think about goals as much as process.
Yeah. Do something that you're likely to do regularly.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And begin that process of ticking off day after day after day that I did this one thing.
That's right.
And so obviously, if you're really seriously unfit and you're struggling, well, then it might be as simple as going for a walk every day.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Seinfeld anecdote.
Yeah.
About telling the jokes, about writing the jokes.
Yeah. So Jerry Seinfeld famously said that the way to be a funny or a comedian, I don't know, is to write a joke once a day. Like he
Yeah.
basically created a habit tracker,
Yeah,
didn't he?
he did.
Where every day the goal was to write a joke
Yeah.
and he ticked it off.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he ticked the next one, he ticked
Yeah.
the next one. So that's about
Yeah.
process
That's
rather
right.
than outcome.
That's right, yeah.
And eventually some of the jokes were funny.
Yeah, that's right. The mantra is don't break the chain.
And there's lots of research around this. This is what Duolingo and a whole lot of other apps do.
cool.
Snapchat essentially teaches you not to have any friends by not breaking the streak.
That's at one end of the spectrum. If you're someone, again, 40s and 60s, who maybe find yourself like reasonably fit, but again, you want to take it more seriously and take it up a notch. This is where I think it can be a little bit more complicated, obviously. But if you find yourself, as many of us do, being reasonably fit, really time poor, but having a bit more money, spare money that you had compared to when you were younger, then I reckon our advice would be take some of that excess money and divert it towards people, programs, coaches, clubs, whatever, that can take the thinking and the extra time out of the equation and just really tell you what to do, make it as simple as possible.
So divest some of your financial capital and buy physical capital, health,
That's
and
right.
energy.
Yeah.
Now, the big caveat is you cannot buy your way to health and you cannot buy motivation. No one can lose the weight for you. There is no silver bullet. And anyone who promises take this tablet and take this simple kind of, one step pain-free experience to being healthy and happy, like I'd run a mile from that.
But to be fair, I can pay someone to help motivate me.
But you can pay someone to make it easier to turn up.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
Can pay, and you can pay for certain drugs or certain medications or certain apps or programs that actually help you with the hard work.
Yes, yeah.
All right, so we've shared a lot of information. Hopefully some ideas stick. You might disagree with us in some areas, and that's totally okay.
You might think cycling's really cool.
That's right. But something would have connected.
Yeah.
So take the meat, spit out the bones. Take a moment of silence and think about it. Okay, so what is something you can do from what we've discussed? Because at the end of the day, if you get unhealthy and seriously unwell, it will affect everything. It's worth the money. So take a minute, pause, and have some space. All right, so we've covered a lot in terms of health, from the 20s to 40s and the midlife slump, the mature shift from, let's say, the 40s and 50s into the second mountain phase, from 65 onwards, is that move from being the star to being the mentor or the one who gives. And maybe the way we should approach or could approach health and fitness is that it's actually not about us.
Yeah.
But to not set ourselves up so that our spouse or our friends or our family have to look after us because we didn't. So there's a generative, an outward-looking approach to how we're approaching our activity.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that is the heartbeat of what it means to make space. Okay, so next week we are going to jump into a new topic, which is career reset. How to rethink your career in different phases of your life, from your 20s to 30s, to maybe your midlife 50s, 60s. What are the different trajectories of reset using my set and reset framework from Spacemaker? And we're going to talk about this over 2 episodes because there is so much to cover. It's such an important topic and it can impact so many people's lives. We're also going to hear a fascinating interview from Gus from Banjo's Bakery Cafe, talking about what it looks like to support franchisees to start their own businesses and the experiences that they've had in helping people with their career resets. But until next time, make space.
See ya.